Channel reports are one of the most powerful parts of Race Studio 3. It's the first feature I use every time I look at a session, whether it's to make sure that the vehicle is not overheating or to see how the driver did. I dig in, I take a quick look, and it lets me make the best decisions as fast as possible. Follow along and I'll show you all the parts of channel reports, how you can configure one for your car, and how I use them. To add a profile to our data is easy as clicking a button. We can see highlighted here the channel report button. When we click that, it will automatically add a tab called channel report. Inside this channel report, we get a lot of information. On the left-hand side, going in columns, we have a checkbox to enable or disable a lap in our analysis. The next column is the lap number, the time, and the distance driven during that lap. After that, all the fields are able to be configured by the user. The column headings are going to show the operator, things like minimum or maximum, lap integer, time of something, all those sorts of things, and what the measure, what that channel is. We can sort our columns by simply clicking the channel column heading. And there, it will sort it by that one. I like to stay sorted by lap, but you can sort any way you would like. The other thing we see in this tab is the channel report graph. The channel report graph is a very good way to take the information that's in the channel report and display it in a graphical way. Across the bottom, we have lap number, and then on the left-hand side, the y-axis going vertical, we have lap time. As we click in a column, it will automatically change that channel report graph to show the data that we clicked. So here I clicked inside the max GPS speed, and we can see the max speed obtained across all the laps. This is a very powerful tool when you're trying to analyze things like what the temperatures, the pressures, or other measures in your data did across a session. AIM has included a number of predefined channel reports for us. They're very easy to get into. We simply click the magic wand icon, and it will bring us to be able to pick them. The first one, vehicle performance. It will give you measures that are related to the vehicle's performance. Things like the max RPM, the maximum and minimum speeds, and the lateral and longitudinal acceleration. You might say, I don't see longitudinal acceleration. A key thing to do is look for the scroll bar at the bottom of the screen where you're able to select it over. And then you'll see we now have longitudinal accelerations. When we go ahead and pick vehicle health, it will give us items related to the health of the vehicle. Typically, those things will be temperatures or voltages. So here we can see we get a minimum external voltage, RPM channels, battery voltage. This data set has voltages for the TPMS system, and then we see a maximum oil pressure. The last wizard that we get is racer performance. Inside racer performance, we're going to get items that are related to how the driver drove. We can see it has the integral for throttle position. That's how many feet of the lap the driver was on the throttle. We have maximum GPS speed, minimum GPS speed, GPS accelerations, and it gives us a very basic way to do it. When we want to add channels to our report, it's as simple as clicking the green plus button. When we do that, a window will open and we're going to have a list of channels and operators. Here, we can go in and select a number of channels or a single in the operators. So here I'm just going to pick minimum and maximum, and one that we talked about briefly was the integral, which will give us the distance that that channel was true. We can say okay, and then if we scroll over, we'll find here are those channels. They work the same as all the others, that we can select the columns and get that information. We can go back over, sort by lap again. If we want to organize our channels, we can go in and click the sort button. Here, it's as simple as choosing a channel, clicking it and holding it, and bringing it to the top. A power tip for you. You can use your Shift or Control key to select multiple channels to move them together. This is a very nice feature where you can sort your columns very quickly. We say okay, and we'll see we are now resorted. The last part If you want to remove a channel, you can select the garbage can icon. Here, we'll give you a list of all the channels available to remove. I'm going to click on the integral of brake pressure, and that column is now gone. Race Studio 3 also has the ability to manage side items. Side items are additional information that's displayed with the original measure. So we can click the side items button and then choose which one of those items. So maybe we want to have something like throttle. We can select throttle position, say OK. Now, along with our original measure, we can get that other item. So here we can see when our max speed was 116, the throttle position was actually back to 36.3%. While this isn't a feature you're going to use with every set of data, it is something that can be very handy as you're digging a little bit deeper. To remove these side items, we click the side item button again and scroll down till we find our checkbox that has our displayed item, where we can unselect it, say OK, and now those are gone. The next option we have in channel reports is the display statistics. That button looks like a bell curve. When we select to show those statistics, it gives us an average, a maximum, a minimum, and a standard deviation. In this channel report, I'm going to scroll over to show you the oil tank temp. Here we have a column that shows the minimum oil tank temp for that lap and the maximum temp for that lap. Very quickly, we can see by the color codes, the blue items are the lowest. So it started out 162. The highs were 239 and 240. If we're looking at just the maximum during that lap, we can see the lowest maximum was 172, and the hottest it got at all was 240.3. The average was 225, and the standard deviation was 19.6. If we click on this channel, we can see that we now have the graph of those values. The graphing of things like temp can be very powerful to help us see how those changed over the course of a session. It's a great way to see if the vehicle's cooling is keeping up with the demands and it's staying steady, if it's still increasing, or it starts to cool down again. The next button that we have to consider is the segments in the channels report. By turning that on, we're able to then break our report down into segments. The segments come from our time distance graph, where we have them here. A very powerful part of this feature is that we're able to then have the calculations and the tabulations done based on just the information in that segment. You can look at things like your minimum speed for a corner, your amount of time on the brakes, your amount of time at full throttle. You can work in some math channels and really dig deep into the data, and you'll notice the card above to show you the video we did using that. Our second to last button is the color method. Here, we have the ability to pick a number of ways to color our graphs. The standard is the classic. That's what we've been looking at all along. It's going to highlight your maximum value as red, your minimum value as blue, or if you've changed those in your settings, it'll color them accordingly. The next option is to report the cells colored to the values. Here, it will color the whole background based on the minimum and the maximum values that we have. It makes a very colorful graph and a very quick way to spot the minimums and the maximums. The final option is to draw it with a histogram. This gives you a view where you can see how those changed over time and how they moved up and down. This is a great way to quickly glance and see where the maximum and the minimum. A neat feature with this as well is when we click inside those columns, we get that information graphed to our right. In looking at this graph, we can see if we're looking at lap distance that there is really one outlier. We can use our toggle to turn that lap off and now get a much better graphing based on the histograms and in the graph to see what really happened. Our last option is the ability to export data. That button is signified in the red circle with the right arrow. When we select it, we have the ability to export the channel report as an MS Excel file or as a CSV. This allows you to then use the data in any form you want with any piece of software that you want. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a pro tip. This is how I use channel reports from my car every time I drive. I've sorted this information in a way that I think is the most important. So very quickly I can look at it and go, what is my external voltage? That's the power being displayed to the dash. I can look down and go, the lowest minimum was 13.2. The highest maximum was 13.6. My system's charging okay. I get an error code from my ECU. It's all zeros. There's no errors. I very quickly look at my maximum engine RPM. It's 7,400. My engine's good to 78. No problems there. What are my temperatures? I can sometimes click on this graph. I can see how they went. It's not trying to get too hot. It's actually cooling down during the run. And I can see my maximum temperature of the coolant, which is actually a head temp on my car, is 254. I can look at my brake temps very quickly. I see my front rotors. I can see that they're staying pretty cool. They're not overheating and my car's safe. I look at my fuel pressure very quickly and I can see that while the graph looks pretty crazy, when I go in and look at my fuel pressure for the maximum that I clicked on, it's only going between 50.1 and 50.3. Don't get fooled by the graph. As we scroll across, I look at my fuel rail temp. It's something that I was interested in, so I used an AIM temp sensor. I stuck it on my fuel rail, and I can see how those values change. And it keeps climbing. Maybe this is something that there's a way to cool the fuel better, to maybe route some air in there, see how it goes. And maybe I find out it doesn't even matter. I look at my lambdas, not because this is a valuable way to analyze the data, simply to check that they are working. And we can see the values change, so I know that they are working how they're supposed to be. My oil filter temp, I look at that to say, is the car overheating? Is it staying consistent? Is it somewhere that's okay? 268 right out of the motor as the maximum. With 215, it was warmed up. That's okay. Oil pressure, I see the lowest minimum was 43.9. The highest maximum was 71. My oil pressures are okay. Oil tank temp, I see the minimum was 162, the maximum 240. My oil's okay. As I keep scrolling across here, I look my trans temp from a low of 141 to a max of 198. No problems. The track temp. Now we're starting to get information that's either a long-term thing or something that's just sort of information. Here I can see the minimum temperature was 78.2 and the maximum temperature was 114. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about, that we had 34 degrees worth of change, probably because there is a bridge. There's some shady spots at Lime Rock where the sun wasn't on them. Crankcase pressure, the minimum, how much vacuum the engine's pulling, was 12.6 and a maximum of 0. This is a good long-term engine management kind of thing, where you can see how well those rings are sealing over time. I've got throttle position. I'm going to keep scrolling over here on you. I have my throttle positions, not because I care particularly about the minimum and the maximum, because I want to make sure that sensor is working for my fuel injection and for my data. So we can see it's going from 4.7 to 99.6. That's okay. More informational. I have tire pressures on my car. So I look at the minimum and the maximum during a lap or during a session. So here I can see how those pressures came up. And a very powerful thing, we can look in here and say at lap 10, they were pretty close to up to temperature or up to pressure, and they came up a little bit more. We can do that for every tire position. The left rear at Lime Rock, the one you're really driving off pretty hard, you'll see it might work a little bit different than the right rear or the right front. Then as we finish going over here, things I just like to look at a little bit is max speed. I can see that the max speed was towards the beginning of the session at 120.5. The max lateral acceleration, I like to look at these because it gives you a good idea if you're driving with the same intensity or if maybe the tires are falling off or anything else. So you can look at left and right, the min and the max, and then the same thing for the longitudinal acceleration, or I'm sorry, for the longitudinal acceleration, where you see how hard the car is accelerating and how hard it's braking. So very quickly with this channel report, you can go through and evaluate, is your car okay? How are you driving? And be ready for the next session. Because if your car is not okay, if you're losing that fuel pressure, it's something you need to work on to be able to get back out there. Because all the data in the world's no good if you don't act on it and you don't make sure the car stays on track and the driver gets to improve their performance. I hope this helps you out. Follow along for more tips and tricks.